Welcome back to another episode of Building Enablement, a web series where we talk to enablement professionals and dive deep into the details on programs, trainings, events, and basically anything that they want to share and highlight, what they did and how they did it. I'm Stephanie Middaugh, and I run the enablement program at Divvy, a financial tech startup out of the Utah area. And today my guest is Katie. Katie, I'm going to butcher your last name. How do you pronounce it?
It's Vermilyea, or as I like to say, Vermil, throw your hands up in the air, say yay. And that is how it's done.
I love that, Vermilyea. Okay. It
Yeah.
sounds almost French, maybe?
It's actually a Dutch-French hybrid, so I feel
Okay.
like I'm just giving you fun facts. I love this. More than you ever wanted to know, and maybe we're afraid to ask. But it's a Dutch-French hybrid, and there is actually a Vermilyea Avenue up in the Bronx in New York, where I'm currently based, and it's actually named after my family, and that is really the only bragging right that comes with that, is that basically we just took land from other people. So that's, yeah.
There you go.
Fun fact.
I love that. So I am super excited to have Katie on today. We've been chatting, I mean, it seems like forever, but probably only like 2 months maybe at this point.
It's very stepbrothers, and I think we just became best friends, and that just sort of happened. And whether you felt that way or not, Stephanie, I just kind of, made you feel that way, and you had no choice. You were voluntold rather than volunteered.
You referred to us as like the Biggie and Tupac because I was kind of on the West Coast and you're on the East Coast. Like this is, except without the rivalry. We've got a lot of love there.
Yes, exactly. I love a good rap battle as much as the next person, and a good beef, but I think it's definitely what could have been.
Awesome. So Katie, tell our audience, for those who don't know you or aren't familiar with you, tell us where you're at, a little bit about your background, give us some insight into who Katie is.
Oh, do we have enough time, Stephanie? That's really the bigger question. But yeah, so I actually, probably like a lot of folks that listen to this, I sort of stumbled into enablement about 7 years ago. And again, feels like forever. But I actually came into it after graduating in 2008 with my master's degree at the height of, the recession and everything just tanking. And you're like, I need to pay back student loans. And after delving into the nonprofit sector and doing a couple other things and working 3 jobs just to pay those loans, ended up in a sales position and really liked it, surprisingly. And so it was really great because I could have conversations with people, which I loved. And I also got to pay my bills. And, that's great. I mean, I fell in love with what a comp plan could be and really maximizing that. So I ended up in sales and really enjoyed it and got to pivot around what was originally going to be my career intent, which was actually to go be a college professor and teach English. Although I am the world's worst speller. So I just want to put that out there. So no judgment on
Grammarly is your friend. It's
Let
great.
me tell you, I love spell check. And it is, again, I like to say you check yourself before you wreck yourself. And Grammarly's great for that. Is this sponsored by Grammarly?
I'm gonna message them after this and ask.
Yeah, please. Yeah, I think you really could fund this, and we could really amp it up. But what I really loved, though, was just volunteering for projects, and I was really lucky in my career to have people who championed what I brought to the table. And when I met someone at one of these mid-year sales meetings that we had, who said, "Hey, have you ever thought about enablement?" I'm like, "What the hell is enablement?" I thought about a month, and then went back to her when she was visiting her office and took a walk around the parking lot, and that's how I got my job as a manager of enablement. And I just kind of fell in love with what the space could be and what it could do for my career, and did that at companies like CT, which is part of a global organization but has a national presence and international presence, and then pivoted over to American Express, where I worked in the global business travel JV for a couple of years, and then decided to delve into the SaaS space because why not? And pivoted to working with startups that weren't quite startups, but they're not quite enterprise businesses like Vimeo, and now at Bitly, which is really exciting.
Nice. So you've got a lot of great experience so far, which is going to kind of open us up to our topic today, which I'm excited about. We kind of went back and forth a little bit on what you wanted to talk about. What are we talking about today?
Oh, that's a great question. And you can keep me honest here if I go off on a tangent, because I feel like an agenda is just a guide for anyone who's ever worked with me. And I'm just like, it's something, but we can take a detour. But what we're talking about today is, I think, the learning discipline tends to be really siloed. And what happens when you look to other disciplines to inspire your approach to enablement? And so we're actually going to talk a little bit about how I look towards my engineers and my product designers to think about user acceptance testing as a way to validate your learning content, which is really exciting for me.
We talked about this kind of like a little bit in our prep session. You were asking like, how do I make this sexy? Like that was on like our
Yeah.
prep document.
It's
And
always my thing. It's how can I sell this? It's really.
I mean, we all know that enablement is one of the sexiest professions
Oh,
just in general. Like, let's be
yeah.
honest here. It is,
Yeah.
just top of the list there.
If people
But
know what it is, it's really sexy to me.
yeah.
I mean, most people don't, so it's not as glamorous, or they think it's just quote unquote training, which I think Paul aptly summarized in his last building enablement session, where he's like, you train animals, but you enable people. So yeah,
Exactly.
definitely.
Yes. So, and I think it's okay to like UAT testing. This is an interesting kind of spin and something that I have never really even considered or thought about it in this way. So I'm really interested to kind of dig into this and see how you think about it. And let's prove and see if it can be sexy. Let's make that a challenge for ourselves by the end of this,
I,
this
I think
series.
I might end up on a close lost on this one, but I'll aspire to close one because I love a good sales pipeline. So anyway.
Katie, for people who aren't familiar with it, like myself, can you explain what UAT is?
I can. I have a feeling my engineers or any person with an engineering background is going to like cringe at my explanation. But this is sort of the TLDR or how I interpret it. So user acceptance testing is a way to sort of check processes and make sure that they work. Typically, there's a scripted document. And with that document, it literally goes step by step to say, were you able to complete the task in the way that it was written? And if you weren't able to complete it, it gives you an opportunity to give feedback. And user acceptance testing has like alpha and beta modes. And again, engineers are going to hate my explanation, so feel free to, of course, correct me. But I was kind of fascinated by it when I was working with a Salesforce administrator at a previous role who has an engineering background, and he loved to do UAT. And I was like, WTF is UAT? Because I need another acronym in my life. And we were working through it, and I was helping him write this script. And I realized it was actually really helpful for me as an enablement professional, because when you think about it, the UAT script is what determines the job aids that you write for documenting process and how to complete that. And so by partnering with him, because he was like, hey, you're really good with language. I hate language, but I can show you what exactly is, I'm asking people to do. Can you like help me write this out? And I was like, yeah, absolutely. And we partnered together. And it was actually something that I found really fun and spoke to a very highly analytical part of my brain. Which I'm a little too analytical. I still can't believe I'm in enablement where I have to like make things fun. I'm like, no, I like the details, make it really like high level or very like minutia that no one, especially salespeople, they don't give a crap about minutia, let's be honest. And anyway, I worked with this person and followed him through UAT testing and helped him with it. And it was really great because I got to have an inside look of what some of the blockers were going to be in rolling out some changes so that I could be more effective with change management. But also thinking about my own documentation, how could I make that easier as opposed to having to edit it all later? And it was something that, again, sparked my interest and led to this light bulb moment of like, well, if you can UAT a platform like Salesforce, why can't you bring that same principle to your learning content or your enablement content and apply it and see how it works?
I love that because one of the things that I've mentioned, I think when I was talking to Paul, was especially in the world that we're kind of finding ourselves in now, we can't rest on in our comfort zones anymore. Like we really do have to push ourselves outside of the boxes that we're used to being in and being comfortable with, and bringing in a different kind of approach to a program or a training, I think is hugely helpful in that, like, it's just going to give you a different angle. It's going to give you a different viewpoint on it, which can inevitably, like, hopefully, if you're doing it right, shine some light on some gaps that you're seeing.
Stephanie, I really loved how you honed in there is that like we can't do things the way we've always done them. And I think that's so important, especially for enablement professionals. And I think one thing that I noticed when I made the shift into working for like businesses that are built on SaaS rather than service companies that have a SaaS component is in those previous enterprise businesses that I worked at, SaaS was part of the process or part of the product that was offered, but it wasn't necessarily the core product. And so you have engineers and you have product people, but they answer to your product managers, and I'd have a lot more clout when it came to saying like, hey, this doesn't work, or hey, I don't like this, can we do this? Whereas when you come into a SaaS-based business where SaaS is the product, your engineers are like gods. And so basically you have to teach yourself a whole new set of skills and language in order to be able to get their engagement and buy-in. And especially with enablement, I think, we spend so much time thinking about like the sales professional or the account manager or customer success person, or we think a lot about marketing. But if you can build those connections with your engineering and your really highly analytical or highly process-oriented product folks, it just opens up a whole new world of being able to incorporate them and also give them some development opportunities as well to maybe present to an audience they wouldn't normally have that exposure to, like a salesperson or an account manager. And so I think learning that language and learning some of their techniques was a way to help bridge the gap that sometimes exists between sales and product and engineering, so that we could all be on the same page and understand why something's important.
I agree. And I think this also kind of feeds into, like, we're going a little bit off script, but I love this conversation. I think this also feeds into a lot regarding your persona. Like, who is your target persona? The company that I was at prior to Divvy, we were a database company. We were selling to architects and engineers and people who are all about kind of that very technical piece of things, and like stuff that was way over the top of my head. And we had to figure out a way to get our salespeople to speak their language. So if you are at a company where that your sales cycle is super technical, your product is super technical, that relationship with the people who are building your product, I think, becomes even hugely more important, because you need them. They speak the language. And if you're selling to that type of persona, your salespeople really do kind of need that connection more than ever in that type of sale.
Oh, yeah. And again, I mentioned I love a good detour, so I'm happy to go down this rabbit hole of the agenda. But it's funny, actually, when I started in enablement, and actually one of the sales roles that actually made my sort of sales career and my transition into enablement was I was selling corporate legal services. And basically, when I would have new hires, once I entered into the enablement role, you're basically giving them business law and business finance 101. And listen, anyone who knows me knows I should not be doing math. And I feel like it's very much, I'm not a lawyer, but I play one on TV because I do love a good debate. and and I feel like what I had to do was take some of those elements and empower my sales and account managers at the time to be able to speak that language, because they would lose all credibility if we put them in front of a general counsel to talk about, lawsuits and managing that paperwork that comes with that. And again, they'll call you out in your bullshit like that quickly. And forgive the East Coast language. I will probably curse way more than necessary on this, but I think it was really important for them to be armed and dangerous. And while they don't need a law degree and they don't need to be a CPA, they need to understand what to look and listen for in order to be able to have that dialogue. And I think the same holds true when you translate that into an internal setting where I'm working with very highly technical people who know things that I don't understand and maybe don't have time to understand, but how can I know enough to be dangerous to be able to create that dialogue and create that area of opportunity to get engagement and buy-in for what I do?
I think we might have stumbled on a new tagline for enablement: making sales just dangerous enough. Like, that's I think that could be a tagline for what enablement does.
Yeah, it's like, I just want you to know enough to be dangerous. Like, that's really it. Like, it's, and I think that's where, like, I sometimes struggle as an enablement professional because I am highly analytical and I love StrengthsFinder, and Stephanie and I have talked about it, right? Whereas I love being able to, my number one strength is learner, and I want to learn everything, but then when I'm bored, I'd like to move on. And so I think I always joke with anyone I work with who's like, crazy enough to hire me, that like, when I'm bored, I'm your biggest problem. And I think that your salespeople are going to get bored, right? If you take them into this really highly technical stuff. And a lot of times, especially in SaaS businesses, you have solution engineers who we pay to know that knowledge, right? And sometimes we treat them like they're supposed to sell for us. But what can you do to equip the salesperson to know enough to be dangerous and know when to leverage the solution engineer as part of that conversation when it gets a little too technical for them? And I think that's something that's a really interesting topic that I probably don't delve into enough, but I think we could probably have a separate conversation about what all that means and how you create those swim lanes for people to be able to do that through engagement.
Absolutely. I'm going to write this down as like another, I'm going to have you on again and write this down as a second topic. So
God, let's get through the first one and see if you want to invite me back. But
okay.
okay.
So
Yeah.
let's kind of transition back to what we were actually going to be talking about. So we're talking about how to apply this like UAT kind of testing model
Yeah.
to our own like internal initiatives and programs. So let's talk a little bit about what problem, like if you're thinking about a particular instance where you were using this approach for a program or initiative, what problem were you ultimately trying to solve with this?
That's such a great question, Stephanie. And I think, I think my other tagline for enablement is, the vanilla ice, if you got a problem, I'll solve it. And so, but we can leave, again, so many like terrible rap references from a white
We're going to
woman. This
create
is
a drinking
really,
game off of this. Like
God, probably.
every time
There's
Katie
always some
mentions a
like
rap reference.
rap reference. And again, and I'm so street, as everybody can tell. So what I was thinking about with this was, how do I get people excited to come into the classroom and learn? And whether it's a virtual classroom, a physical classroom, which we will return to someday, or it's a self-paced classroom like a learning management system, an LMS, how do you get people really excited for what's coming and engaged with that content? And so a lot of times when you think of the Kirkpatrick model for learning evaluation, you have your level 1 through level 4. And a lot of people will do programs to quote unquote like pilot something, and you do a survey and you get feedback. And when I was thinking about what UAT does, is UAT is essentially like a level 1 Kirkpatrick evaluation. And so when I was thinking about it, it's like, well, instead of doing this whole pilot and putting on a whole production and doing this whole thing, what if I could, especially for e-learning, because we're focused on our LMS platform, what if I could take a couple of people and have a little champion team and say, okay, here's a great development opportunity for you. We're going to use you to test out our content and give us feedback and tell us, like, is it resonating with you, or is it kind of crap and you don't like it and it's not working, or you come across a bug in the system and we need to fix that. And so what I did was actually wrote a UAT script based on learning content that I had written. And I can actually share the, thing if you want. We can take a look at it. But I composed a whole script. I have a task for each thing I'm asking them to complete. They have to notate whether they were able to complete or not complete that. And then each line has an area for feedback. So they can tell me specifically, without having to be on a call together, they can do it in their own time and give me that feedback to say, hey, I loved this activity, or, this wasn't working, or, you know what, I think you thought this was a good idea, but it didn't really land for me. And that was a really interesting way to give people development opportunity that they could brag about in a quarterly or year-end review, and also create a buzz around learning. Because when you assign something and people eye roll, you have like some seeds planted with people who also are going to receive that learning. And they can be like, hey, listen, I know you think it's just another thing, but I actually had a chance to test it out and it's actually really cool. And here's why. So you're creating a buzz around your programs and creating that sort of internal reference within your teams, so that you have people who are buying into the vision you're trying to sell.
I love that. And that was one of the things that Paul Butterfield and I talked about
Yeah.
on my last session, was creating this sense of trust and building that trust with your sales reps so that they know, because again, we do kind of come in with these starry eyes. They're just going to love everything we're putting out. And it's just not the case. Like you mentioned, you are going to have programs and trainings that fall flat on their face. But creating that trust with your reps, and especially if you're running almost like a alpha beta program with them to kind of do that, now you've got almost these, kind of plants in the sales floor that are there to champion your programs and your initiatives and your trainings. I think that's super important to make sure that like they understand the impact that enablement can have, instead of just like, oh yeah, it's just another training and I have to do it because my manager said so. They're actually like, this could probably help me. This will take me to the next level.
Yeah, and even if they're slightly skeptical, they're at least willing to give it a shot, right? And I'll, like I said earlier, like I think we've all had hits and misses when it comes to, enablement efforts. And how can you just like minimize the risk that your enablement effort is going to fail or fall flat on its face? And it may not be 100, but how can you get at least 80% engagement and, go from and build from there, which is, I think, really exciting.
Absolutely. So walk me through your thought process when you were kind of creating this approach or working through this like process.
Yeah. So, Stephanie, now might be a good time if you want, I can share my screen and you can take a peek inside the brain of what
Yes,
my UAT documents look like. It's
let's
been a
do
hot
it.
topic. Yeah, I feel very vulnerable right now. I'm not sure. You guys might be scared. I keep going with like the Jesse Spano. I'm so excited. I'm so excited. I'm so scared.
Got those
Well,
caffeine pills off to the side of you.
let me tell you, like, it's my cup of coffee that's somewhere over here, out of frame. All right. So, and actually, the other reason I love UAT while I'm pulling this up, and this is kind of a silly reason, but I also really love it because it gives me a chance to, for example, if I'm going on PTO, which I actually I was able to take a week off a couple weeks ago. I was able to assign this and say, you have a week to test it, and I'm just out of the office. And it was wonderful for me because I wasn't stopping progress from being made, and I was giving people the autonomy to do something within their own time, which I think was really was
Set
refreshing.
it and
So let me
forget
pull this
it.
up.
I like it.
Exactly. Yeah, it's my Ronson slow cooker of learning valuation. So I appreciate that. So here we have up on my screen just a sample script. So recently I put together an e-learning for our executive business reviews, which are like customer-facing quarterly business reviews, except we do them at varying frequencies depending on customer tier. And we can get into the minutia of what that looks like. But typically how I structure it is I may have just one guide or one learning module. If I have more than one, you'll see, again, that title there. And then what I do is I break down each section of the learning module and each page or each activity that they might interact with. And yes, I mentioned earlier, I'm very analytical. So every emoji that you see on here actually corresponds to something because I have an entire style guide for my learning management system because I'm that much of a nerd and I love process and it's
Hell
so
yeah.
scary. Yeah, it's, again, I told you this could be kind of scary. So what I do is I have a template that I use each and every time. And so I document each page and there's a drop down outcome that says completed or not completed. And it also color codes. So if they select completed, it goes in green. If it's not completed, it of course goes in red. And then they give me feedback on that specific item so that we know exactly what the watchouts are there or what was effective and what landed, which I think is really helpful.
This is fantastic. Would you be willing to like share this as like a template for people that I can share a link to this? Or is this
Absolutely.
like secret
Yeah.
sauce that you can't share?
I think sharing is caring. And I'm definitely happy to share this as a reference because I think that the other thing I'm really passionate about in enablement, which Stephanie's probably a whole other topic, is paying it forward. I wouldn't be where I am in my career if someone hadn't taken a chance on me, to quote ABBA. And I think that it's super important to share those resources and help people get off on the right foot because there is no school of enablement. You can't get a degree in this no matter what like third-rate program is trying to say, we've got a certificate for that. It's like, I don't have a certificate, all right? Like it means nothing in the real world and it means nothing from a collegiate credentials anyway. But I think it's really important to provide those resources for folks. I'm definitely happy to share this. You can edit that answer down, essentially. Yes.
Awesome.
Sorry, I got on my soapbox for a second there, and you can take
No,
me off
this
the
is
soapbox.
great. And you and I mean, this is the entire reason why I'm doing this series is to try and give back and kind of highlight these
Yeah.
things and create that tribal knowledge that people maybe don't always have. Because you're right, I don't have a degree. You and I both got our degrees in English. Like
Yeah,
this is
that was really effective for me, everybody who's watching. Like, it's I still don't know if my parents are proud of that decision, but we made the decision and I'm the one who paid for it. So essentially I ate that one, but it's great. Yeah.
amen
And
to
let me put
that.
together great UAT documents. So I'll actually take you into what some of the feedback looks like. And I love that I give my folks full permission to call my baby ugly. And granted, I say that as a childless woman. But, I think sometimes we're afraid to get that feedback. And I'm very upfront and say, I want you to challenge me. And I may overrule you, but I want you to give me that feedback because if you have that question, chances are somebody else is going to have that question too. So I'm really careful in how I instruct my UAT testers in that you have full autonomy to call this baby ugly. Like you can tell me what's not working. And I want to hear it because it makes me better and it makes a better experience. So it allows them to sort of own the outcome, which is one of our culture values here at Bitly, which I'm really excited about. So,
Absolutely.
so yes,
do the
Yeah.
same thing on my side. I tell them I want very candid, honest feedback. Is don't be afraid to hurt my feelings. Like, this can only be as good as you tell me it is. Like, and if you tell me it's sunshine and roses, then I don't, and it's actually like just nothing but a load of crap, then I don't
Yeah.
know that. Like,
Yeah, it's like, I want you to tell me it's crap. Like, it was funny. I was asking someone, I'm like, do I have permission to give you, coaching feedback? And this person's like, of course. And I'm like, you can do this. And he's like, that's a great suggestion. I'm like, you also had full autonomy to say it was a crap suggestion too. And I said, and that's fine. Like, people give you a lot of stuff and you just take what you need. I think, I've heard that advice. You see that on probably a lot of like yoga classes of take what you need. And I think the same holds true for coaching and enablement. Is just take what you need. You're not going to take away everything, right? They absorb what, like 20% if we're lucky of what we give them. So take what you need. But to pivot,
yeah.
yeah, okay.
I was going to say, so I like kind of folding in the next question that I usually ask. I would imagine this is if you're going to get like executive buy-in from leaders on a training or even like your approach, which is kind of what we're talking about when you're building out something like this. Do you show them this document? Because I think this could be super powerful to show an executive to get this buy-in.
That's such a great question. And I think this is where you really do a lot of reading the room. Especially there are some executives. And again, I think this is where emotional intelligence comes in. And this is where, especially in enablement, this is where your sales skills come in, and you got to dust those off, because there are some executives. I have one person who, if he does listen to this, he'll know I'm talking about him, but he is highly analytical like myself. And he loves this. Like, this is like, it speaks to him. He's just like, I get what you're trying to do. It makes perfect sense. I love it. And so like something like this really resonates with him when I'm asking for him to donate his direct reports time to provide UAT feedback. Whereas I have other executives who really could give a shit. And that's not what they care about. They just want to care, when am I getting this? Is it going to be good? And if that's all they care about, that's all they care about, and that's fine. But for those folks who do want to see sort of like how the sausage is made, like showing something like this to say, this is my approach, especially in interviews. Like, this comes up when you're doing interviews sometimes for enablement roles. Like, this is just kind of giving them a sneak peek of what value you could bring to their organization, to say, like, we're going to take this sort of UAT approach to evaluating your learning content. And that, again, depending on the audience, can really resonate.
I agree. And I think if you're able to show, for people who are listening, because I know there are a lot of folks that are on kind of the market right now looking for a new position, if you're able to show the people that you're interviewing with that you think through all of these aspects, it's not just about, how am I doing this? Am I doing it in person, in classroom, or virtually? Am I putting it in an LMS system? If you're able to show them the amount of time and effort and care that you're putting into these, a lot of times frontline managers especially can be some of your harshest critics and people to win over. If they see the amount of time and effort that you're putting into these types of programs, they'll be like, oh crap, like, this is, I'm on board. If you're putting this much effort into it, I can at least do my part to make sure my team is taking care of this.
Yeah, and I'm a big fan of like surprise and delight, right? And I think a lot of people, one of the first questions I ask, and I know, again, I love detours as we're learning in this interview, is one of the questions I always ask is, what does enablement mean to your organization? And I have a couple of the resources to help define that, but I'm really specific in how I define enablement. And I think in any interview process, like, you're interviewing them as much as they're interviewing you. And if your visions on what enablement is don't align, or you don't think they have the potential to align, it's not a job you want to take, because you're just going to be miserable. And I think that was something that I'm really fortunate at Bitly, that when, I was interviewing with them, I really thought about who I'd be working with. And I'm really excited that I have a lot of leaders who are willing to let me take these kind of risks. And so this whole UAT process was really something that I'd started at a previous company, but really drove home at Bitly. And they were willing to trust me on it, especially because they were used to learning that was homegrown, generated, which again is not a bad thing. Like, you're solutioning for an immediate need. But when you take the time to step back and put some thought into it and really come in as an enablement expert and be that subject matter expert, something like this allowed you to guide and help people buy into your thought process of, this is how I define enablement. And it's not just putting a bunch of slides on a PowerPoint, putting it on a virtual meeting and hoping for the best. This is how we create engagement. And I'm also helping your folks to develop, because I might be spotting future enablement talent to build my team. I might be helping to give someone a development opportunity and understand the value of enablement. And Stephanie, you pointed out, I mean, just showing certain things like outcomes, and I'll just show you here, like it helps to quantify like what it is that you're spending your time on. When someone asks, why did you spend 40 hours creating this? I can be like, well, so we could do this, right? Create engaging activities, create moments of learning, and create something that redefines what learning means to the organization and at the organizational level.
Let's kind of transition into like results. So
Sure.
from this aspect of things, it's not kind of the typical program that we would maybe highlight on this series, but you're still like getting results. Like I'm seeing right now on your screen, you're showing us like all of the feedback they completed or didn't complete. How are you measuring the results of a UAT kind of approach to building out like a training or initiative?
Yeah, that's a really great question. So first thing for is, and again, this is where I'm a very visual person. So if you couldn't tell by the emojis, so this is where like just looking at some of this feedback, I'm like, okay, is there more green than red, right? So is there more stuff that worked that didn't work? So I look at just like the structure of the program, like did the system behave in the way that I wanted it to in order to be able to actually be successful? So in good news, we have mostly green for Claire's evaluation, so we could see that. And I guess the other way I measure success is I also take into consideration things you can't always quantify just by looking at this, right? I mean, there are certain things where you can see like, Claire's telling me, I love that you were having them do research, right? And somebody else, like they'll put a snarky, humorous comment on like, I love that you made this a choice, right? And, or I would have selected this one, but I know you were asking for that one. And so I think I look to see like, did they have fun with this? And I think fun is hard to quantify, but I actually do like kickoff sessions for the UAT to explain the ask. I give them time to work on it independently of a meeting. And then we come together to do a group feedback session where typically I take the template and we go through and document that feedback so I can action that feedback. So in this example, actually, what was really great is I got to give feedback to my LMS vendor to let them know that the embedding functionality we were using for our listening party activity, which is where they get to listen to call snippets, wasn't working. And it was a bug we found that affected not just us, but their other customers. So I think there are a couple different levels of ROI. And I think there's even an ROI for just like your vendors as well.
I think that's great too. And I know you and I use the same LMS vendor.
Yes.
And if you've partnered with a really good like vendor of whoever it might be, they are going to really appreciate that feedback because they want the end user experience to be a delightful one. Ultimately, if they're worth their salt, they're going to want their user experience to be delightful. So something like this is hugely helpful internally, externally. Like, I mean, this is a win-win-win, in the words of Michael Scott, I think, on that one episode.
I know. I feel like, when you were talking about UAT earlier, it's like, what's your process? And I'm like, I want people to fear how much they love me through UAT. And and I really want them to like my content, I'll be honest. So there is that. But
I love that. So did you ultimately like putting this into, you said that you kind of started this at the last company, you really did drill into it there at Bitly. Did you ultimately kind of achieve what you were hoping to when you had initially sat with that engineer and like discovered what this UAT, did it turn out the way that you were hoping it to?
It's actually really funny that you bring this up because I think it sort of evolved into a really interesting piece. Whereas I think that I'm a big fan of enablement, practitioners being good project managers. And if it's not a strong suit, hire for that strong suit. And I think actually, because I've had so many end users go through my UAT testing format, I actually get recruited to help with UAT testing for other things that I'll eventually have to enable. So it actually lets you get involved earlier in the process than you normally would, and it positions you a little bit more as an internal consultant. So, for example, right now at Bitly, we're in the process of implementing an enhancement for Salesforce, and I'm actually helping to lead the UAT efforts for that and sort of the project management to help get that across the finish line to being enabled about a month from now, hopefully. And so I think what it does is it, one, helps people feel confident in your content, helps you get buy-in from leaders to say, like, I've tested it, it works, here's the results. And then also, too, it allows you to, again, when you're in conversations with engineers and products, show that you speak their language and that you value what they do. And again, it eliminates some of that friction between sales or CS and other departments. When you show that you're willing to adopt some of their practices and speak their language, even at a very high level, So yeah, so I think like to quantify the results from this, I think what was really exciting was, one, you have everything available. You've gotten some buy-in from your initial audience, which is I think huge to get that end user buy-in. I know a lot of people care about frontline managers or leadership, but at the end of the day, I always look at enablement as, an advocate for the end user. And whether my end user is that salesperson or that account manager, or maybe my end user is sometimes a frontline manager. I'm going to leadership to be like, this is what we need. It's my job to be the best advocate I could be, and it gives me something quantifiable to be able to showcase my argument and make that case for change. And this is a great way to do that. And like I mentioned, I think it also shows engineers and product folks that you speak their language, or that you at least honor what they do and how they approach it. And looking across those disciplines for those best practices, I think just keeps the enablement space as well as the learning space really fresh and engaging. And again, when I'm bored, I'm your biggest problem. And I think when I'm bored in my community, of my thought community, it's not exciting for me to say, hey, I'm an enablement practitioner, and we do the same thing over and over again. It's like, I want to be an enablement practitioner, and I want to innovate, and I want to drive change, and this is how I do it. And not that you have to do it my way, although I'm partial to it. I think it really helps to just, create and refresh the conversations that we're having.
Amen. Amen.
Thank you for coming to my TED Talk. I appreciate it.
So when you look back on kind of this UAT approach to creating trainings, initiatives, et cetera, what's something that maybe surprised you when you look back on it?
I think like a lot of enablement folks, I think sometimes you feel like you're on this island by yourself, and it's just you talking to yourself, especially when you're a team of one, which I think a lot of enablement practitioners right now probably are for various reasons. And it can be really frustrating and really isolating. And so what I love with this process is it allows me to expand my team. And even though like these aren't folks that report directly to me, I get to consider them an extension of my enablement team because they act as champions. And I think what was surprising about this approach is I thought it was just some harebrained scheme. And I was like, no one's ever going to want this. Like, I'm alone in my principles. It's fine. But when I presented it, I was really surprised at how receptive people were, because you gave them a framework and a structure in which to think through and actually action, as opposed to just saying, hey, write it in a blank document and get back to me. Like, this is giving them structure and framework to say, like, I want you to participate, and here are instructions on how you can participate. And you're giving them that guidance so that they still can express themselves, but you're giving them a framework in which to do that. And I think, from writing classes, right, it's a conceit, right? It's how you actually, again, construct that writing exercise of like, you can write this short story, but, every word has to start with the letter E, or like, poetry exercises are really big like that. And so I think of it just as like a writing constraint, and how do you get creative within a format that you have?
I think if there's anything that my few psychology classes taught me in college, it's that human beings, adults especially, they really want their voice to be heard, for one, and they also really, really like structure. So those two things combined, I think with this give people enough of, they feel like they have a hand in it, they feel like they're not being excluded, and they've been given a template, a format that they don't really have to think a whole lot about it. You've kind of done that heavy lifting for them. Which I think is fantastic. So my last question for you, Katie, one of the things that I like to leave everybody with is some kind of actionable takeaway. We'll share out your template, which I think is great, but what's something that you can maybe share with the audience that they could take back to their own enablement practice tomorrow or next week?
There's so many things I could say to answer that, and there's really no right answer, but I would say, like, if you're feeling stuck, or if you're feeling bored, or if you feel like you're just creatively drained, I think looking across disciplines, or trying something different, is a way to sort of come at it with fresh eyes and a fresh approach. And I guess I'll give you two for one. I would say the other thing is, when you're looking across those disciplines, look at the people across those disciplines who can help you, because I think that the more people you involve, you're, again, showing them how the sausage is made so that they have an understanding of what enablement means, which is especially helpful if you're in an organization that maybe doesn't have as clear or as an aligned a definition of enablement as you'd like.
That's perfect. Katie, thank you so much for joining. We had some detours. We had a great conversation.
That's the best kind of conversation, Stephanie. It's when it doesn't go as planned, and you end up in some exciting spots. So thank you for thank you for taking those detours with me and allowing me to take them. You enabled me today, so I appreciate that.
That's my job. Awesome. Yeah, so thanks again, Katie, for joining me, and thanks to our viewers for watching. If you or someone that you know in the enablement community would be good to highlight on this show, please tag them in the thread or comments below. Be sure to connect with Katie on LinkedIn. She's also part of the Sales Enablement Squad, so you can find her there as well. And I can't believe I'm saying this, but I'm going to start doing it. If you like this video, definitely hit the like button. And if you want to get alerted to the new videos, hit subscribe as well. And until next time, keep building, everybody.